Now we're going to talk about how biologists sort organisms into groups. What biologists do, basically, because they've got loads of time on their hands, is that they classify organisms based on how closely related they are to one another. So an organism is a living thing, and the process of sorting organisms into groups is called classification. So what biologists do is they start with a kingdom. So a kingdom is a massive group of organisms that all share a similar characteristic. So the kingdom I'm going to talk about for an example is the animal kingdom. Within the animal kingdom, the next step down is called a phylum. So this is a group that has similar characteristics within the animal kingdom. So the one I'm going to talk about is vertebrates. So now we have animal kingdom, it's a vertebrate, this organism that I've classified. The next step down from phylum is class. So this, again, is like a group within a group within a group. So my kingdom was animal, my phylum was vertebrates, my class is mammals. Next step down is called an order. And the order of the organism that I've classified is carnivore. So we've got, see if you can guess what it is. Animal kingdom, it's a vertebrate, so it has a backbone. Its class is mammal. Its order is carnivore. Next step down, family. The family of my organism is feline, so it's a cat. Next step down from family is genus, it's called. The genus of my organism is that it's a wild cat. So, animal kingdom, phylum is vertebrate, class is mammal, order is carnivore, family is feline, genus is wild cat, and finally the species in this case is a tiger. So what I've done there is I've given you an example of how we sort organisms into groups in this process called classification. You take a group of organisms that share similar characteristics and they get grouped into what's called a species. Groups of species make up a genus. Groups of genera, which is the plural for genus, make up a family. Groups of families, so in this case, groups of felines come under the order of carnivore. Groups of carnivores in this case come under the class of mammals, which come under the phylum of vertebrates, which come under the animal kingdom. So basically, this whole thing is just like a filing cabinet system. So I've classified my organism, which was a tiger, by saying it's part of the animal kingdom, it's a vertebrate, it's a mammal, it's a carnivore, it's a feline, it's a wild cat, and then finally it's a tiger. An easy way to remember in case an exam asks you what order this is, because people sometimes get what comes after what a bit confused, is I just remember KP, COF, GS. KP, COF, GS. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So we're going to take a look at the different kingdoms in order. You might know already there are 5 kingdoms. The first of the 5 is the animal kingdom. Something is classed as an animal if it has a multicellular structure, so it's made up of lots of different cells that come together to make up the whole organism. Those cells have no cell walls. You might remember plants have cell walls, but animals don't have cell walls. They're multicellular, they don't have cell walls, and finally, all their cells have in them a nucleus. And the nucleus is like the brain of the cell. It contains all the genetic information that make up this animal. So that is kingdom number 1, the animal kingdom. Multicellular, no cell walls, and the cells have in them a nucleus. The second of the kingdoms is the plant kingdom. Something is classified as a plant and put into the plant kingdom if it has a multicellular structure like animals, but plant cells contain chlorophyll, which they use in photosynthesis and which is responsible for the green colour of the plant. Plants also have cell walls which are made of cellulose. So, to be classified in the plant kingdom, the organism must be multicellular, contain chlorophyll, and have cell walls which are made of cellulose. So that's number 2, the plant kingdom. Number 1 was the animal kingdom. Number 3 is the fungi kingdom. Something is classed as a fungi if it is multicellular, again, composed of lots of different cells. Their cells contain no chlorophyll. They contain a nucleus like the animal cells and the plant cells. They contain a nucleus, but what makes the fungi different is how they feed. So this is a key word. Fungi are saprophytes. Saprophytes. And what a saprophyte is it's something that gets its nutrients from dead or decaying matter. So fungi is the kingdom in which all the organisms are multicellular, contain no chlorophyll, contain cells which have in them a nucleus, and all the organisms in the fungi kingdom are saprophytes. They get their nutrients from dead or decaying matter. So that's number 3, fungi. Number 4 in the animal kingdom are protocysts. Protocysts, and these are mainly unicellular organisms, which means that they only have one cell. They're only composed of one cell, and the cell has a nucleus. So for something to be a protocyst, it must be unicellular mostly. Some are multicellular, but mainly they're unicellular, and they must have a nucleus like this. So that's number 4, that's protocysts. The final one are these things which are called prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are unicellular, so they're only composed of one cell. They have a very simple cell structure with no nucleus. That's what makes something a prokaryote, is that it has no nucleus. So pro means before, karyote means nucleus. Before nucleuses evolved, these things existed. Prokaryotes, they still exist now, and for an organism to be classed in the prokaryote kingdom, they must be unicellular and have no nucleus. So there, we've just gone through the 5 kingdoms. They were, in reverse order, prokaryotes, protocysts, fungi, plants, and animals. So that's number 2, 3, 4, and 5, the 5 kingdoms. An important thing to remember for the exam is that scientists do not class viruses as living things. A virus can only survive if it is inside a living thing, a living cell. So scientists do not class viruses as living things. So they're not part of any of these kingdoms. The next thing we need to talk about is how is the animal kingdom subdivided? Within the animal kingdom, we can separate organisms into different groups. One way to separate them is to ask, do they have a backbone? So are they vertebrates or not? Vertebrate means they have a backbone. So we ask, within the animal kingdom, do they have a backbone? The posh word for the group of organisms that contain backbones are chordata. Chordata, chordata. If something is classified under the heading chordata, it definitely has a backbone. Another way, we've subdivided it one way. The next thing would obviously be to say, no, it doesn't have a backbone and therefore it's called an invertebrate. So within the animal kingdom we have vertebrates, chordata and invertebrates. These vertebrates then can be grouped, and there's different ways that we can group them. One way is to ask, how do they take in oxygen? So we can group vertebrates depending on how their bodies take in oxygen. So for example, fish have gills, humans have lungs, so these are separate. They're both vertebrates, but we've grouped them into gills versus lungs. Another way that we can group vertebrates is to ask, how do they reproduce? So if we compare fish and humans again, fish undergo external reproduction where they release their eggs into the water and they're fertilised externally, whereas humans undergo internal reproduction. So we've grouped them now into how they take in oxygen and how they reproduce. A final example that I'm going to talk about here of how we can group vertebrates is how they regulate their body temperature. So there are things called homeotherms, which are things like us, which keep our body temperature constant. And there are these things called poikilotherms, whose temperature varies with the surrounding temperature. So there we've grouped vertebrates into how they take in oxygen, how they reproduce, and how they control their body temperature.